Okay. We've got a couple of keynotes for you to bring it home this afternoon. And then there's going to be a choir performance and then networking after that. And that's day one. And then we'll be back here again tomorrow. The first of the keynotes is called Leading Volunteer Motivation: How Leadership Affects Volunteer Satisfaction and Commitment. As you know, effective volunteer leadership is essential for maintaining an engaged, committed and high-performing volunteer team. Unlike paid employees, volunteers contribute their time and effort out of passion, personal fulfillment or a desire to support a cause. Effective leadership involves understanding what drives individuals to volunteer, recognising their contributions and creating an environment that fosters enthusiasm and purpose. There are two presenters for this session, Dr. Toby Newstead and Tran, both from the University of Tasmania. Toby is a leadership scholar specialising in virtues-based leadership development, leadership ethics and leadership in the volunteer sector. Her research has been published in the top management journals, and she recently published a book on leadership and virtues. Dr. Newstead teaches into the Executive MBA and coordinates the Graduate Certificate in Leadership and Organisational Capability, and she regularly delivers impactful workshops, keynotes, and facilitation sessions for industry. Tran is a third-year PhD candidate. She holds a master's degree in educational leadership from the University of Waikato and has a strong interest in volunteering. Her PhD research aims to advance the knowledge of leadership and leadership development within the volunteer context and to identify effective practices for organisations in government to better support and retain volunteers. Please join me in welcoming Toby and Tram.
Thank you very much. So maybe that one will be easier. Does my clicker work? There. I want to start by saying that what you guys are doing already is amazing. I have been working in the leadership space in the academic leadership space for over a decade, and I worked in management consulting before that, doing leadership development in sort of corporate and industrial contexts. And leadership is really, really hard. And what you guys are doing, practicing leadership among people doing super important work that's often complex and difficult, and they're showing up to do it for no pay, what you do is especially difficult and especially important. And having worked in the leadership space for a while, I say with the utmost confidence that the best leadership I see is in a volunteering context, because there is such a true and genuine focus on the people, on the relationships, on the purpose alignment, the mission, the values, and it is beautiful. So we're talking about leadership today, and we're going to talk about some leadership practices and some of our research that has come out more recently on what we know about the distinctiveness of leading in volunteering contexts. But I wanted to start with that really important point that you're already doing an amazing job. Hopefully, what we outlined for you today gives you some new things to try, perhaps, some new insights, but you're already doing awesome, and I wanted to make that very clear before we get into it. So, gotta punch it. Okay, I've been introduced. I didn't know if I was getting introduced, so I won't do it again. Toby, Tram, we're from UTAS. At UTAS, we have a volunteer leadership research group. And the reason we have that research group is because having worked in the leadership space for some time, I became aware of the fact that, while there is a huge leadership industry, there is almost no research on leading within volunteering contexts. So in 2019, we started our volunteering leadership research group at UTAS, and since then we have worked with a number of peak bodies, including Volunteering Queensland, have a very long-standing and meaningful relationship with Volunteering Tasmania, was pretty involved with Volunteering Australia through the drafting of the national strategy, and then that implementation phase. We have done lots of industry reports, partnered research, and a lot of it's also published sort of in academic outlets. Happy to share. Most of this is open access, so you can find it if you really like reading research insights. I'm also happy to share stuff, and we have contact details at the end that I will share with you. Just to sort of preface what we're going to be focused on today, and that is retaining volunteers. We've heard a few times today that volunteer numbers are dropping in the most in most cases across the sector. Some subsectors, some organizations are not seeing a drop in volunteering, but sort of across the board, there's a general consensus that numbers are dropping. And what we're focused on in our work on leading volunteers is really retention. Because attracting and recruiting volunteers, that's super important. But when it comes to leadership, often we have an opportunity to use our leadership to most effect when we already have volunteers that we are interacting with. So that is our focus, is on how we can practice and develop our leadership to help keep our volunteers volunteering. So what we're going to do over the next, it was going to be about 30 minutes. We're trying to condense it down because we're already past the time that we were supposed to start talking. So we'll try to bring it in for you. What we're going to do is we're going to start with a bit of a look at what leadership is. This is a deceptively simple question, and there are lots of versions to it. I just want to start with a few moments on that so that as we get into the content of our research, we're all sort of loosely on the same page in terms of what we're talking about when we are talking about leading and managing volunteers. Then I'm going to pass over to Tram. Tram's going to outline some of the general links between leadership and volunteering. A lot of that we have already sort of loosely and very precisely talked about today. And then Tram's going to outline sort of a fairly substantial chunk of her PhD research to date, which is 8 evidence-based practices for helping you retain your volunteers. So this has to do with all the research that's been done. She's packaged it up into 8 tidy little strategies for you. So she'll talk you through them. Before we then get a little bit more specific, context is everything. And in leadership, that is true. And leading volunteers, that is true. And while leading within a volunteering context is sort of specific, there's a ton of diversity even within the volunteering ecosystem. So we'll do a bit of a deeper dive on a specific piece of research another one of our colleagues has led on leading emergency service response. And I've seen some uniforms here today, so hopefully what we share from that work resonates with those of you who are working in emergency response volunteering. Then we were going to allow some time for you guys to do a little bit of reflection and action planning for your own practice of leadership and leading your volunteers, but we'll see. That might get gobbled up to sort of recoup some time in the program. So that's what we're going to do over the next 30-ish minutes. And as promised, first up, what is leadership? Now, I've been working on and with leadership for a while, and especially in my teaching, my students very rarely get a precise definition of leadership. And one of the main reasons for that is that leadership is so contextual that it's going to look so different in different contexts that if we try to use a precise definition, it's just not going to apply when we look somewhere else or somewhere else. So instead of giving a precise definition, I talk in slightly more general terms about what leadership involves, and I'll get to that in just one moment. But first, a couple of key points. I think there is a very prevailing, and hopefully less so in this room, but a very sort of prevalent assumption that when we talk about leaders and leadership, we're talking about the boss, who the boss is and what the boss does. And ideally, and in a lot of cases, we have someone who is the boss, so they are in a management position, they have legitimate authority, they can hire, fire, promote, invest resources or not in people. Often, they also demonstrate leadership, and that's fantastic, that's what we want. But just being the boss or having that position does not necessarily mean we practice leadership, and definitely doesn't mean we have to practice leadership all the time, right? There's other things we have to do when we're the boss. So I just want to make that distinction because, well, hopefully less so in this room again, but most of us working in other sectors have experienced working for bosses who definitely do not demonstrate leadership, especially good leadership, okay? So I just want to sort of tease apart leading and leadership from a position of formal authority, a management position, being the boss. The flip side of this is that we don't need a position in order to lead. So as we're talking about leadership practices over the next 20 minutes or so, I don't want you to think, well, I'm not the boss, so this doesn't apply to me. Because leadership is a practice. It is a process that occurs between people, and we do not need to be the boss. We do not need to have a formal position in order to practice leadership. And so my sort of provocation is that you are all leaders. Hopefully you already identify as a leader. If not, I encourage you, I insist that you are a leader because you do practice leadership. And the way that we understand leadership, again, you know, researchers are weird and we don't agree on a ton, but there is sort of emerging consensus that when we're talking about leadership, we're talking about sort of relational processes between people that occur when we start working together towards shared goals. And again, I try to steer clear from very precise definitions, but I will offer you sort of these key elements of leadership. And when I offer these elements of leadership, what I'm, again, reminding you of is that this is not just what the boss does, this is what is happening when leadership is happening. And ideally, the boss is involved, but not always and not necessarily. And so the first key element is relationships. And I know loosely who I'm talking to, and I know relationships is really front and center when it comes to managing volunteers. That is brilliant, that is beautiful. When it comes to leadership, the reason relationships are the sort of most fundamental element is because it's through relationships that influence flows and influence is exchanged. Now, influence it's how we affect other people. It's how we affect what someone else is thinking, feeling, or doing. There are lots of ways to affect what people are thinking, feeling, and doing. We can command, and sometimes, some situations, again, emergency response, we need command, and that is totally appropriate. There are other ways which are not ideal, and I would maybe argue that there's never a time for things like coercion, manipulation, and other ways of getting people to do things. And what really makes leadership distinct is that it's influence that is getting people to do things, that is affecting how people are thinking, what they're feeling, and what they're doing. Now, what makes influence distinct is that it is given. We do not take influence, we give it. We choose, sometimes implicitly, but we choose who we are influenced by. So when leadership is occurring, one person is not forcing other people to do stuff or to take on board what they're saying. The other people are actively choosing to be influenced by, or sometimes a little more passively choosing. But there's an active giving of influence, okay? It's not taken. And that's a really important distinction of leadership from a lot of these other processes of getting people to do things. The other two sort of key elements, absolutely key elements of leadership are these ideas of shared purpose and collective effort. And again, you kind of know this. Shared purpose is what we're all doing here together. And when you have volunteers showing up, chances are, probably, hopefully, they have a pretty clear sense of why, what it is you're striving towards together. And then collective effort is sort of that, almost sometimes it feels a little bit magical synergy that happens when you start achieving more together than you can working in isolation. So these are the key elements of leadership. If you are seeing or experiencing these things, chances are leadership is happening. If you are not seeing or experiencing these things, chances are something else is happening, which often is fine, but these really do distinguish leadership. Now, no. Okay, so I just want to go back to this, not the position. And again, that's an invitation when Tram, and she's about to jump in now and outline these 8 practices that have been shown to be effective in leading volunteers because they help volunteers want to come back. It's not about position. That's about anyone that has the opportunity to interact with volunteers when they're volunteering, because we all do lead when we do these things, when we have relationships, exchange influence, identify, pursue shared purpose, and nurture collective efforts. So these practices apply to all of us. But leadership is not one size fits all, so the practice is going to look different for each of you when you implement it in your unique volunteering context. So I'm going to leave it there. I will rejoin you once Tram has outlined these 8 practices for you. It's hard to push.
Yes. Thank you, Toby. Hi, everyone. My name is Tram. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Tasmania. I'm doing a PhD research focusing on investigating and developing volunteer leadership. So in the next around 15 minutes, I will go with you through 2 parts. The first one is what does leadership do with volunteering? And the second part will be some effective, practical leadership strategies to keep volunteering. And these are the summary from my 13,000 word review. So my apologize that I have a long note and sometimes I almost read from this. Yeah. Okay, so as Toby mentioned earlier, all of us have the potential to be leaders, even though you realize it or not. And then, in a lot of instances, volunteering develops leadership capabilities. So there is evidence suggested that team-based corporate volunteering days are better at developing teamwork or leadership, more than something like having fancy consultant in and deliver workshop. But of more relevance to the vitality of volunteering is the fact that leadership is crucial to sustaining the volunteer workforces. So leadership is just not about making decisions or setting goals, it's about the connection. Leadership is the relationship that volunteers have with their formal or informal leaders. Leadership directly influences how or if a volunteer feels about their volunteering experience. It also shapes volunteer entire volunteering experience. So when you have good leadership, volunteers feel supported, valued, and heard. So it's more likely that they stay engaged, committed, and continue volunteering for your organization. But when leadership is lacking, volunteers may feel unsupported, unappreciated, disconnected, so it's easy for them to walk away. So this brings us to the important questions. What is effective volunteer leadership? So by researching, we have found, that volunteer leadership is deemed effective if it continues to work to keep volunteers satisfied, committed enough to continue volunteering and contributing to the organizational values. So, some scholars from my research, they suggest that we apply conventional approaches to leading or managing volunteers. However, leadership in the paid context for paid employee might not appropriate for volunteers who work in the unpaid context. So there are several leadership styles have been suggested, such as transformational leadership, servant leadership, autonomy supportive leadership. However, volunteer and paid employees, they have different motivation, commitment, and also preferences. So volunteers, they don't have formal obligation like employees. They are also not bound by salary or contracts. So this means that volunteers' commitment is not fueled by something monetary incentives, but they are fueled by personal fulfillment, values, passion. So this makes it's important for us to understand that what is effective volunteer leadership within the volunteering context. So we did a systematic literature review. So we researched all the empirical studies on leading volunteer in the top quality leadership, management, and voluntary journals to find any of the practice that deemed to be effective in leading volunteers. So it helped us to come up with the answer that effective volunteer leadership facilitates volunteer satisfaction, engagement, commitment, and retention or turnover intention. So volunteer satisfaction, this means how content or fulfilled volunteers feel about their volunteering experience. Engagement is how dedicated, absorbed, vigorous volunteer is when completing their volunteering. Commitment is volunteers' emotional attachment to their organization, their loyalty, or their willingness to remain with the organization. And retention or turnover intention, it is how likely a volunteer is to quit or to continue volunteering. So we keep this in mind that effective volunteer leadership that facilitate volunteer satisfaction, engagement, commitment, and retention. And before we move to the next part, that having summed up the practical strategy for effective volunteer leadership, I would like to ask you all to take a moment to reflect on your own experience. So, in your own volunteer context and experience, what are the effective leadership practices that you have experienced that stood out to you as good, as effective, as positive, And within this, we will use Slido to answer. Here, we use the word practice for leadership because we believe that it should be action, not something just theories or ideas. So anything that you do, you actually do, something that you apply, that you refine, repeat it over time. So we will have around 2 to 3 minutes for this because we are running out of time. So I hope you all have shared your positive, effective volunteer leadership practice in your mind. Okay, we will go back later. I think that behind each of the practice that you have shared, there must be really meaningful stories, and I hope that we could have enough time to hear that. But because we don't, so I suggested that we keep it in mind first, and now we shift our perspective to another perspective to hear what research tells us all about effective volunteer leadership practice. So we keep in mind previously strongly that effective volunteer leadership facilitates, sorry, you got that in your handout. Yes, so effective volunteer leadership facilitates volunteer satisfaction, engagement, commitment, and retention. And we keep it in mind so that we carefully examine any of the studies from the review to look for any leadership practice that determine to be effective in sustaining and retaining volunteer. And then we come up with these 8 practices. So now I will shortly explain you what each practice means and also give you some suggested action how to implement these practices. For the first practice is enabling meaningful relationship. So this practice means leaders provide volunteers with opportunity to build and maintain to build rapport and maintain their useful, authentic social connection with others. When volunteers usually thrive when they feel connected with their leaders, peers, and people in their community. Good relationship characterized on trust, loyalty, mutual understanding also important because it makes volunteers more satisfied. So to foster and enable more meaningful relationship, as a leaders, you can provide volunteers with more opportunity to join social, professional events, to join social groups, to get to know people that can offer valuable resources or knowledge to volunteers. It's also important that leaders encourage volunteers to build strong network within and outside the organization. So for the second practice, this is facilitating personal development. So this practice means leaders care and concerned for volunteer advancement so that they create conditions for volunteer growth both personally and professionally. Offering development opportunities can help volunteers more confident and fulfilled, which can help them more satisfied, committed with the organization. So as a leader, you can provide volunteer with a lot of chances, such as promotion, taking on more responsibility, challenging projects, or something like secondment, so that they can broaden their experience, knowledge, and appetite. The third practice, it will be fostering a sense of identity. So with this practice, you make your volunteer feel inclusive and then connect volunteers with the impact of their work. Help volunteers see how their efforts align with the organizational mission and values. This is really important because when you clearly explain volunteer about the impact of their work, it helps volunteers feel more satisfied and also infuse a sense of engagement and connection with their organization. And leaders can also foster a sense of identity. For example, you clearly explain, regularly communicate organizational mission and values so that you make your volunteers feel more connected with these. It's also important that leaders create a sense of cohesion within the organization so that volunteers feel they are part of a unified team, a group, or something bigger. So the next practice, the fourth one will be promoting effective communication. This means leaders encourage two-way communication, prioritize active listening, and also create an environment where volunteers can share and hear from different perspectives. So effective communication is important for volunteer engagement, satisfaction, retention. It is because when volunteers can feel comfortably to share and also talk with leaders about their feelings, opinion, it makes them feel more connected, satisfied, and motivated to engage with the organization. So, to promote effective communication, as a leader, you should make an effort to communicate regularly with volunteers. It's also important to keep them in the loop about any organizational issues. The next practice will be granting autonomy. So this means that leaders provide volunteers a level of freedom so that they can make decisions or they have more control over their volunteering. When volunteers can flexibly adjust and align their volunteering with personal goals or expectations, it tends that they are more accountable, motivated, and satisfied. And they are also more connected with the organizational goals. So to foster a sense of identity, leaders might encourage volunteers to take more responsibility for how they shape their volunteering or how they approach their task. And it's also important that when you make any decision, you should ask for volunteer input, suggestion, and if possible, just incorporate them into the plans. The sixth practice will be enhancing organizational support. So this means that you provide volunteers with a secure and supportive environment and ensure that volunteers have access to necessary resources and also support when they need it. Organizational support is important because it shows organizations and leaders care for volunteer well-being and safety. And this, of course, makes sure that volunteers have positive volunteering experience and participation. It also generates a sense of safety, make them more committed, engaged. To practice enhancing organizational support, leaders should pay attention to volunteer overall satisfaction and well-being. Or when you make decisions, it's important to take into account volunteers' perspective and opinions. The seventh practice is giving recognition. So it's important for leaders that they positively and regularly acknowledge volunteer their work, the impact of their work, their contribution to the organization. Volunteer work without financial compensation, but research evidence that non-monetary rewards and recognition can boost their satisfaction and commitment. So giving recognition infuses volunteers a sense of accomplishment, making them more satisfied and committed with their work. So again, leader might regularly recognize and praise volunteer for the impact of their work, their contribution, their performance. But it's not just at individual achievement, it's also important that leader acknowledge the good work done by a team. So the last practice, this is ensuring equity. So this practice is about creating an organizational environment that treats every volunteer with balance, respect, and justice. Because when volunteers feel that they are treated unfairly or they have a sense of inequity, they become dissatisfied, upset, and quit volunteering. An ethical climate with sincere and authentic leaders also help build credibility, which make volunteers want to continue to volunteering, motivate them to stay with the organization. So leaders should ensure that all the protocols, processes, or decisions in the organization are applied consistently without bias, and also treat volunteers with dignity and respect. So these are the 8 practices, and again, you can have a look at it again with some of the suggested action from the handout here. However, we want to emphasize again that these are from the research perspective. It may or may not align with your effective leadership practice that you have shared before, your experience. And also, we acknowledge that even though that we have right leadership in place, but we have different contexts and we work with different people. So there are something like internal driver that motivate people to volunteer. And at this point, leadership and leaders' behavior play a key role into triggering, fulfilling that motivation so that volunteers engage in volunteering or not. So I would hand it back over to Toby. She will explain you more with a closer look related to leadership and volunteer motivation. Thank you.
Right, so Tram just sort of ended on the point that the practices that have been distilled from research, hopefully you see some alignment with things that you are doing in your context. Maybe not all apply, maybe they're sort of phrased slightly differently to what you see on the ground, and that is sort of to be expected because context is everything. And to really drive home that point, what I want to do now is share with you some of the research insights we've gleaned by taking a much closer look at a very specific volunteering context, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the emergency response volunteering context within regional Australia. So another colleague of ours from the Volunteer Leadership Research Group back at UTAS couldn't be here with us today, Dr. Amber Tsai. She completed her PhD through our research group, and she really focused on emergency response volunteers, what motivates them to volunteer, and then what do their motivations to volunteer tell us about the kind of leadership they need and want in order to keep volunteering. Now, emergency response volunteers are, at least, I don't know if you use this term in the real world, but in research, they're considered high stakes. And they're considered high stakes because, well, the work they do is high stakes, but also because it takes a lot of training to get them response ready. So there's a long lead time and a lot of upkeep to have a response ready brigade of fire or ambulance or SES group, right? So they're high stakes because they take a lot of training and we want to keep them for as long as we can. So it was sort of that context that Amber focused her research on, and what she looked at was how we can determine the motivations people have for volunteering. And for this piece of the research we used, it's probably the most commonly used tool to assess motivations to volunteer. It's called the Volunteer Functions Inventory. It's not the only one, but it is very commonly used. So we use this tool, and the Volunteer Functions Inventory identifies 6 different functions that volunteering can serve people. So each one is sort of a motivation to volunteer, where people motivated for the values function are volunteering because it allows them an opportunity to express their personal beliefs and values through an organization with which they're aligned. The understanding function has to do with volunteering. It's those people that volunteer because volunteering offers them an opportunity to learn new knowledge or skills. The career function, we heard sort of a mention of this earlier. That's when people volunteer because it's going to help them progress in their careers, which is fine, but that's a distinct motivation to volunteer. The social function is about volunteering because it will offer us a chance for social connection. And the enhancement function is a motivation to volunteer because it will be an opportunity for us to enhance our self-esteem or sort of grow and develop psychologically. The sixth function is this protective function, which is when we volunteer because it helps us reduce or negate sort of negative feelings or negative experiences. So people volunteer for all of these reasons, and people typically have a primary reason for volunteering. So one of these things will be the primary reason they start to volunteer. What we did with Amber's research is we took the volunteer functions inventory and we rolled it out with emergency response volunteers across regional Australia, and then we used these motivations to volunteer to sort of segment emergency response volunteers so we could say, okay, well, those that are volunteering primarily for a values function, this is the kind of leadership they need and want in order to keep volunteering. And it was a very fancy survey that Amber designed, and it measured all these things and, proved them statistically and whatnot. And same for each of these functions. So people motivated for the understanding function, what kind of leadership do they need and want in order to keep volunteering? So I'm not going to go through all of the research, each of the functions, because it's long and it's published and I can share it. Again, grab me after, or contact details will be on the last slide, or you can just Google it and it'll come up. But what I do want to do is share a couple of the insights we gleaned, because they really helped drive home the importance of context, because this was, again, a very specific subsector of volunteering, and it was regional. Perhaps it would be different in urban, don't know. But it really does help us understand the importance of sort of a granular look at who it is we're dealing with when we are attempting to lead with and lead our volunteers. So the first one was those volunteers motivated, again, emergency response in regional Australia, those emergency response volunteers motivated by the enhancement function. So that is, they are volunteering because it offers them an opportunity to increase their self-esteem and grow psychologically. Well, they prefer relational leadership practices, which that aligns with practice 1 that Tram just outlined. And we kind of expect that. We really tend to focus on relationship-focused leadership. That's great. I advocate for that all the time. So one of these volunteers shared that she being this volunteer's leader, she is always supportive and has kind words for everyone. So really focused on the relational nature, being kind, being inclusive, and fostering those meaningful relationships. When we looked at those volunteers motivated for the opportunity to have that sort of values alignment, so motivated by the values function, well, they preferred a slightly different form of leadership. They prefer leadership focused more on personal development. So emergency response volunteers that are there because of the values alignment, they tend to want leaders who are a little bit more focused on aligning opportunities for volunteers to enhance their learning and growth. And another quote from one of these volunteers is, "My leader facilitated discussions on where we wanted to go as a brigade." So that's an opportunity to align personal values with the organizational values. And then he asked us what we wanted to do and was willing to get us there. So that's really investing in this personal development of the individual volunteer in their group. Okay, so values, function, if we're motivated by values, the kind of leadership emergency response volunteers tend to prefer is this focus on personal development. Now, the one that surprised us, and this is the last one that I'll share with you, was this. And emergency response volunteers who are motivated by the understanding function, so they are volunteering because they see it as an opportunity to gain new knowledge and skills. Now, there weren't demographic correlations with the other motivational profiles. There were for this one, and these volunteers also tended to be younger. So they tended to be younger. They're motivating because it's an opportunity to enhance their understanding, and they want task-related leadership, which is surprising because we never go out there and train leaders how to be more task-focused. We go out there and we talk about the importance of relationships and recognition and building shared purpose. And we do hypothesize that these volunteers probably have decent relationships. They're probably not volunteering in super toxic, destructive, abusive types of situations. But they want task-focused. So less of the nice personal development, more of the planning, monitoring, training. Okay, and that is somewhat surprising when we think about the general advice and consensus on what we need to do to lead our volunteers. So what this means for you is that it is very important, and I know you know your volunteers, but it is vitally important that we contextualize our leadership knowledge and our leadership practices. And there is a ton of very general leadership stuff out there. And Tram sort of alluded to that. A lot of the stylistic theories that are out there in the leadership industry, they're okay, but they are not contextualized to a volunteering context, and they're not contextualized to your context. And so what this means for you, we suggest, is that as Tram indicated in your conference bags, you have handouts, you have a copy of the 8 practices that have been distilled from all of the studies on leading volunteers. You have a copy of those 6 functions, those 6 reasons people are motivated to volunteer, and you have just a very simple sort of action plan. And we won't spend time doing it now because we're trying to cinch it in time-wise. But we do encourage you to pull that out when you get back to normal life or your workplace or your volunteering place and have a think about it, because it's vitally important. And you can, I mean, if you can afford the time and resources to do a comprehensive piece of research and actually empirically determine for pretty much sure what exactly is motivating your volunteers and what exactly they want in terms of leadership, that's fantastic. Many of us cannot afford the time and resources involved in that, but you can use your powers of discernment, you can use your knowledge of your volunteers, you can use the resources we've shared with you, and you can just make some educated guesses. I think my volunteers are showing up for these reasons. This, I think, is what motivates them. So then which of these practices might best help me trigger their motivations, help keep them satisfied, engaged, and likely to keep showing up so we can keep pursuing and delivering the vital services that we do. I will leave it there. I'm sorry, we were going to give you action planning time and do a bit of a workshop, but we're saving time. Yes? 5 minutes shaved, but that was your time, so I apologize. This is the action plan. You have these handouts in your conference packs, and then this one, happy, if you want to be in touch, if you like reading research, happy to send you research or industry reports, or if you want to talk research, we could talk research all day. Grab us after, be in touch. Thank you so much. Keep doing the amazing work you do. Thank you.
Oh, that was fantastic. Thank you both, Toby and Tram. So know your volunteers and what motivates them to tailor your management style to retain your volunteers. And I mean, that last slide that we didn't get to, where you were going to sort of ask, what motivates your volunteers and then what management or leadership style is needed. I guess the thing is you could have so many different motivations in all of your volunteers and then have to sort of tailor your leadership according to who you're talking to. I thought that was really, really interesting. Thank you. Well, our final session today is all about storytelling with impact and how it can be a powerful tool for inspiring change, building connections, and leaving a lasting impression. And our presenter for this final presentation of the day is Dr. Ruth Knight. With extensive leadership experience in the community services and education sectors, Ruth understands the unique challenges and opportunities organisations encounter when engaging volunteers and measuring social impact. Her expertise includes helping leaders co-design and evaluate volunteer programs. Please welcome Dr. Ruth Knight.
Wonderful. Oh, I think I'll just clear my throat. Thank you. I have been so just enjoyed so many of speakers today, and I know that I am the last person to really try and think about a lot of what you've heard today and see how you can practically take away some ideas around the importance of storytelling. So if you don't know Yallery, have a look at it when you do get home or get back to your office. But Yallery is an organisation that provides access, Indigenous young people, access to education and leadership development. So please check us out and find find out what Yallery does if you've never heard of Yallery. But today we're talking about storytelling, and I thought we just might start with a little game of myth or truth. So I've been thinking, my first one might be a bit contentious here. So we'll have a little go. And online people, please play along if you want to as well. Just have a think about this. So my first question, and if you feel comfortable, put up your hand if you think this is a truth, okay? If you feel comfortable, right? The first one is, you will forget most of what you heard today. Okay, there has been quite a few hands raised in the room. Why do you think that you will forget most of what you heard today? It's typically because, unless you've written it down or unless you've heard something that is emotionally connected with you, it's very quickly goes from our brain. And in fact, even tomorrow you might come back and go, yeah, there were some really great speakers, but what did they say? Now, my second question is then, you are 22 times more likely to remember the stories that you heard today than anything else. Raise your hand if you think that's true. Yes. Research does tell us that in actual fact, all of the stories that you heard today, you're much more likely to remember those things than anything else. All right, my third one is, over 65% of our daily conversations are based on storytelling. Raise your hand if you think that's true. Well, actually, research says it is. That over 65% of your communication with people just generally is storytelling, particularly with people that you have close relationships with, because storytelling creates an emotional connection with people. So my last one is, storytelling releases oxytocin. It's a hormone also known as the love hormone. Who thinks that's true? Yeah, they do research about everything these days, okay? And they found that storytelling, it creates that emotional connection with people because of oxytocin. Okay, so we know then that storytelling is it's not just good for your memory, it's good for your relationships. It's good to catch up with your girlfriends, your boyfriends, whoever it is, that you catch up and you share stories. So what can we learn then from all the research about storytelling? Well, there's one beautiful story that I love to tell, which is about a hospital that was working with pediatric patients, children, who were regularly having to go through the MRI. And they found that 80% of these children who were sick and having to go through the machine were needing sedation. So that meant the hospital had to calm everyone down. They had to bring in anaesthetists. It was taking a long time. The parents were stressed. The kids were stressed. It was just a really awful experience for these very sick kids. So the hospital brought in a guy called Doug Dietz, and they said to him, what can we do? Because it's just too traumatic and expensive for a lot of these, or expensive for the hospital, but traumatic for the kids. And so Doug basically spent a lot of time just going around and talking to the children, to parents, to educators, to the hospital staff. And he worked out that in actual fact, one idea to try and reduce the trauma of going through the MRI might be storytelling. And I'll just tell you, get straight to the end, this is what he did. They turned it into a story. So the nursing staff were involved, the parents were involved, and of course the children started to become part of the story. And they did some evaluation a few months later, and they found that the kids, their sedation went down like this, their stress levels went down, parents' stress levels went down. That meant they had less hospital staff, less anaesthesia. And in fact, Doug even says, and if you want to read all more about it, you can go to the IDEO website. Doug says that even some of the kids said, "When are we coming back, Mum?" Yeah. So the reason why I tell you this is because they went on to do more studies about telling stories to kids in hospital. And in fact, that's my daughter there who was in hospital for a week a few years ago. And I can absolutely, from my own experience, know that the volunteers from Radio Lollipop at Gold Coast Hospital who came around and played games and told stories to my daughter had a big impact on her experience. But they've done other research and shown that if you tell stories to kids who are sick or in hospital, when they think back and reflect back on their hospital experience, they talk more positively about their experience. So a big shout out to Radio Lollipop and also the Starlight people and everybody that goes in and works with people in hospital and tells stories. So what does this all mean for you then, as people who are working in all sorts of different areas of the community? And it's really about, for me, just thinking about how do we tell stories about what you do and the volunteering that you do and the impact that you make. So I thought we might do a really quick little exercise because you've been listening a long time. In the room, I'd like to invite you to just turn to the person next to you. You might have to just find someone and I'm going to put it on the clock, 2 minutes. And I want you to just share with your partner in 1 minute, tell us a story about what excites you about volunteering. So something that and 1 minute, just whatever comes to your mind, just share with your partner. What is it that excites you about volunteering? Now, we're also going to put it up on the Slido for those people online. So we also want to know everybody at home. So if you're at home, you can join in with us. So I'm going to put it 2 minutes on the clock. Can you all find a partner? See if you can find a partner. You might have to get up, walk over to them. 2 minutes. Make sure you've swapped over. All right, that's 2 minutes. Well done. All right, well done. Fantastic. Well, I heard you all talking, which means that you were all sharing ideas and stories about your experiences of volunteering and what excites you about volunteers in your organisation. And for me, storytelling starts with just asking curious questions. This is just one question that you can start asking people about their own lives or their own experiences. Because once you start asking curious questions, people love to share. And then you can learn a lot from people's experiences by just asking simple questions. Oh, there's some of them. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody, online as well, for sharing us your thoughts. So, what does this mean for you and your need to recruit and retain volunteers? Well, the first thing to know is that everybody is a storyteller. We have to remember that everybody has a story to tell. I simply invited you to talk to somebody and you were telling stories. So everybody has a story. We all have a story. We just have to have an opportunity to share it. And I like the earlier presentation about the voices, the volunteer voices, giving people an opportunity to share their story. So we really want you to know that everybody has a story to share. And then we can use those stories in very strategic ways. And we can use them to recruit and retain volunteers. So once you're able to understand that and believe that, then you can start to say, well, how do we do it? How do we do it in our organisation, and how can I do it? Well, remember then that stories are used to shape ideas and opinions. Throughout the millennia of time, we have used stories. And as you heard the research earlier, that most of our communication today is storytelling. Who loves to read books and watch films and, watch podcasts, listen to radio, all right? All of that, I'm sure you'll say, is storytelling because people love to listen to stories. So, and when you've got kids, I'm sure most of you read stories to your kids because you know that children love stories. That's how you shape their opinions and their ideas. It's what they do to learn. And it's also that way to connect with people. So storytelling is this amazing tool that you can use to recruit and retain volunteers. Now, in your bags, I've given you a handout of the 5 things, but in actual fact, in your handout, it's 4, okay? But don't worry. It's 4 main steps that I'm going to walk you through in the next couple of minutes. And it's going to be a real fast, masterclass in how to use storytelling to recruit and retain volunteers. And very quickly, in your pack, you'll find this, and we'll send it to everybody at home, is first of all, know why you want to tell stories. Have a purpose and an intention. Why and how can we use stories? So get that first in your mind. Think that down. Write it down. There's many different ways that you can use stories. Then you have to find the storyteller. Who is it that's willing to share their story? Now, it could be written, it could be filmed, okay, different ways, but whether it's written or filmed, you've got to find that person who's willing to share their story. Then you have to collect the story, and I'm going to give you some questions like that first one that you just used, just to open up people's conversation and help them tell their story. Because we're sometimes not comfortable, or we've never been asked, what is our story and what do we think about things? So we need good questions that help people have that conversation. Then we need to share that story somehow. Don't keep it to yourself. We need to think about all the ways that you can get that out to an audience. So if you're recruiting volunteers, you want to get it out publicly. And we talked earlier about social media, and it might be on YouTube, or it might be your newsletters. But if it's internal and it's a way to retain your volunteers and reward your volunteers, then it might be internal coffee mornings or newsletters that you go, or just in, different things that you do internally. So think about all the ways that you can share that story. And then you do always want to measure the impact. So did those stories help us recruit volunteers or retain them? How do people feel when they heard stories? And Brad, you should have seen all those photos of those stories being shared about people who were doing amazing things. And I can tell you that when you listen to a lot of those stories, you feel amazing, don't you? And when you heard all the stories today about different people's stories of their volunteering, it makes you feel good. So just listening to stories is a way to connect people together. Okay, so we're just going to quickly go over these points, and I'm going to give you some tips. So, number 1, why should we tell stories? You've got to believe that storytelling is a tool for you as an organisation. That's first and foremost. Think about who and why should we be telling stories, because you do not want to waste your precious time and resources if you don't have that strategic question answered first. but they are a powerful tool. So I thought we'd show you a little video about Selba's story. Oh, we'll turn the sound up. Can we just go back? So,
of the African people. When I started the organization,
yeah, let's just go back and start that again. It's only a minute, so let's go back. And let's hear Selba. And as you listen to Selba's story,
I volunteer because volunteering has changed my life and my daughter's life. My name is Selba Gondoza Luka. I am originally from Malawi in Central Africa. Afro's Care is a culturally appropriate mental health organization that was established by myself out of lived experiences of the African people. When I started the organization, I had depression and generalized anxiety. When I started helping others, I saw that healing was very quick, like it was a speedy recovery. Now, I'm a public speaker. I go to conferences. Volunteering has helped me to bond with my daughter, bond with women who are in trouble, and bonding with the community. So they come here to volunteer their hours, doing some gardening, cooking so that we can eat. There's English classes where they improve their English, build resumes, and then we find them jobs. Sometimes you can tell someone, oh, come and volunteer. Immediately you mention the volunteer part, you turn off their mind. They have to see. Volunteer doesn't mean even physical work. Picking up a phone, finding out, how are you today? Volunteering has founded real Selba, who I am. I will remain to be a volunteer, regardless of what.
Oh, yeah. I absolutely love Selba's story. And you can see that in just 1.5 minutes, you've gotten to know why she volunteers, the impact it's made on her life and the people around her, and what it's doing for her community. And so stories don't have to be long. They have to actually just be straight to the point and tell us what it is. So let's just talk about then, how do we find those stories? Well, Selbas are all around you. In fact, some of you have hundreds of volunteers, if not thousands. So you have all these stories, and it's just about making sure that you invite people to tell their story. And you need to then just decide whether it's going to be read, heard, or watched. So you can see that's a film, obviously, but it doesn't have to be filmed. It might be just a written one. But whoever it is, you just need to invite them to share their story. But then we have to actually ask, well, how do we craft that story? So I don't know if you saw that in Selba's story, she talked about how she felt before volunteering, how she got into volunteering, and then the impact of volunteering. And then you can see then there wasn't a strong call to action or a takeaway, but it was that volunteering is very positive for her life and her community. So there's many different ways of structuring stories, but I like the very simple CART. And it's just context, adversity, resolution, and takeaway. And it just means context is where are you, where's your volunteer, what do you do? And then adversity is what's the challenge. So what did they do before volunteering, or how were they feeling, or how did they get to be involved? The resolution is then what do they do now, and the impact on their life and the impact on your community. And then the takeaway can be the takeaway for them as a volunteer, or it can be takeaway for the audience that is actually watching the story. So those 4 key elements is all you need in a story. And those are the very powerful parts. And always try to make it about 1 to 3 minutes. In today's day, and you heard all those young people this morning say, we're on TikTok, I think that's less than 1 to 3 minutes. And I'm not even on TikTok, but I know that even on YouTube today, you have to keep it to 3 minutes max. And in fact, I found it very hard to find a lot of really good volunteer stories that were under 3 minutes. So I was like curious, why are we not sharing more stories? Because it is very easy when we know how to craft them. All right, so these are some questions, how you help people tell their story. You can't just sit there blankly and say, tell me your story, because they'll probably go frozen and they'll say, well, what do you want to know, okay? So you have to use some really great questions like these ones that actually help people say, oh, yeah, what excites me about volunteering? Oh, the words that I would describe about my volunteering experience. So all you need to do is ask them these questions and they will start talking. And then just encourage them and then say, tell me more, describe that more and what happened there. Just put on your listening ears. And it's just amazing what people will share with you. When we get to the takeaway and the call to action element of CART, this is where you might ask questions like, well, what did you learn or think about in that moment, or as you become a volunteer? Or what would you recommend? Who would you recommend joins you as a volunteer? Or what should they do to get involved? Now, remember that this is the person telling the story. And so if it's Selba, she'll say, well, I would do this. Or if I was a volunteer, I'd like to share with you, come and, etc. So all you're doing is trying to encourage your storyteller to give the takeaway to the audience. And it's very, very simple if you ask the right questions. Now, quick little checklist. We're not going to go into all of this, but there are obviously some things that you need to make sure that you're doing. You're getting consent. You're thinking about accessibility, fairness, even music and AI. These are all things that as you start to develop your storytelling skills, you'll start to think about these things. But obviously consent is the main one, that you don't ask people to share their story and then just put it out on social media and you haven't told them that you're going to do that. All right, so make sure that you've always got their consent, and I try to actually show them it before I share it. So I don't ever share it without saying, hey, look, can you have a quick look? This is what we've come up with. Are you happy with it? Are you ready for it to go out? And you might even want to get them to sign a consent form to say, yep, I'm happy. Because once it's out on social media, you can't pull it back in. All right? So be very careful with that. Okay, so then you've got to share this story. And there are lots and lots of different ways, internally and externally, that you can share these stories. Now, if you're doing a film, you obviously could share it on a social media platform, but you might also do a written form and do it in your newsletter. You might also do it at a morning tea, and you might also do it in an impact report or a fundraising event. So one story can have a multiplier effect when you're using a good story and you're using it in lots of different ways. And of course, you can do an extended story of, 1,000 words, and then you can say, no, for our newsletter, we want a 200 mini version of that story. So make sure that, you're not sort of thinking that everything has got to be a long story and you can't use them in multiple ways. All right, so I thought we'd show you another story. This is from Turtle Care in Sunshine Coast, because I wanted to encourage you to think, oh, I haven't got to be a filmmaker and I've got to have like a big camera. I've seen here the big cameras. No. You've all got phones? Yes? You can all capture a story. And I thought this one was especially good. And I'll also get you to just, as you're watching it, think about the cart. Think about what questions has she been asked to tell her story.
My name's Lisa Baldwin and I volunteer for Turtle Care Sunshine Coast. We moved down from Darwin 8 years ago and we were living at Bedina and we'd only been here about a month, and I was taking a walk and there was actually a sign saying that a turtle nest had been relocated. And our intention, because we didn't know anyone, was to join some sort of group and volunteer as a way of meeting like-minded people. So then we thought, oh, maybe there's something to this turtle thing. So we just looked into it, and just great timing actually. The season was about to start and we joined the season and we just loved it from the beginning. The Turtle Care volunteers monitor the beach and the nesting population of sea turtles. So basically we begin usually in the middle of November, and most volunteers are rostered to walk on the beach every day. So that means that we have each Each suburb is broken into separate groups, and within that group we have our own team of walkers who walk that particular part of the beach. And so at 5:30 every morning, there's a roster, someone's on every stretch of the beach looking for turtle tracks. So that's the beginning of the season, we're looking for turtle tracks, and then if we find tracks, we're looking for nests, identifying eggs, potentially moving eggs. Our accredited volunteers would do that. And then as the season progresses, then we have hatchling emergencies, and then we have volunteers who would monitor the beach at night and sit with the nest and hopefully see the hatchlings come out. I'm amazed that we actually have these wild creatures coming up on our beaches right next to where we all live. So I think we get a lot from that, making a difference in that regard towards conserving that particular species. But also, I think we get a lot from just participating in being part of a greater conservation project. So there's that, and socially too for a lot of people, yeah, that interaction with each other. We make great friends. Every year we're excited for Turtle Care to start again so we can catch up with everyone, and there's nothing better than being able to give back, and we get a sense of well-being from that and satisfaction that we've done something good with our time.
So you can, yeah, it's good, give her a clap. But you can see there that she's been asked some good questions and she's been able to just answer those questions. Now there's a little bit of editing that has gone on there, and you can very, very easily download some even free software, but there's very cheap software that can enable you to just cut and edit it. CapCut is the most easy one that I even use, okay? So if I can use CapCut, anybody can use it, and you would just take it on your phone and you would load it up to CapCut. You would just cut it out to make it down to 3 minutes or 1 minute, however long you want it, and then you just upload it again. So very, very easy to do things on your phone. Now, if you want to get a little bit more sophisticated, you could take it and actually show the turtles. You know, you could do that B-roll. It's called B-roll. Anything else that's not actually her speaking is called B-roll. And so you might want to put some pictures of the turtle or the pictures of that group walking down the beach together. That would just, you can start to add those things. But that's as you become more comfortable and you get more excited about the storytelling, and as you start putting it out there and getting feedback from people. So we really want to measure the impact then and learn how these sharing the stories can have an impact on the people that are sharing the story and other people, but also who's coming along and finding out more. So even that, I was thinking, I'd like to go and be part of the Turtle Watch, you know. I'd love to see little turtles and feel like I was part of that community. So as you start to get it out there, you can actually start to say to people, oh, you've applied to be a volunteer, how did you hear about us? And once you start to hear people saying, oh, I saw you on YouTube, or I saw you on TikTok, you know, that's when you start to know, ooh, we're making a difference here. People are really starting to get to know us and our volunteers. So we really want to know what are the stories that are connecting with people and how is it making people feel. And if it's an internal thing and you're telling stories to motivate and retain your volunteers, then again, you'd be getting feedback from your internal volunteers. All right, I'm going to show you one last one. We've got time, so I want to show you Nikki Chapman. Now, this is an English video, actually. Nikki's from England, but I really like the way that they've put this video together, because this is really a little bit more sophisticated than just simply a camera, but you can see again how she's used the cart structure of talking about and her call to action. She's really trying to recruit you, all right? So I'm going to ask, when you finish this, who's going to go and volunteer with Nikki, okay?
Welcome to Mary's Living and Giving for Save the Children. Come on in. So I thought I'd put the kettle on. Every shift starts with a cup of tea, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat. I'm really passionate about being a volunteer. Oh yes, I can go on for quite a long time. What's really wonderful is our shop is open again. I did the very first shift on the Monday when we were allowed to reopen. It was like a celebration. It was so lovely to see everybody. And people came through the door with big smiles on their faces. They told us what they'd been up to. We sold so many clothes, but it was just lovely. Lovely. Have a lovely birthday. Take care. Bye. But that's such a rewarding part of the job, being with the rest of the volunteers, but also I'll do some steaming. I'm not great at steaming. Behind the till. Nice, I like this a lot. Sorting through the donations, perfect for summer. If you've been working from home or you may have been made redundant or furloughed, and you just need that little extra oomph to get you back in a right place, I would seriously consider volunteering. It just makes me feel great, is the honest truth. I don't know how to explain it. When I walk through the door, I'm not a presenter, I'm not a broadcaster, I'm a volunteer, and I want to be here. We are really fortunate here in Mary's Living and Giving for Save the Children, because at the end of the day, we're helping children throughout the whole world. We are always looking for fresh volunteers. So if you're considering it, even just for a second, don't just disregard it. Do it. Do it today. I promise you, not only will you love it, but you won't regret it.
All right, who's joining up? All right. Yeah, I think so. That was great. Yeah. So you saw then that Nikki took you through kind of an example. This is what we do. This is really, she took you, and the filming was just about following her little journey through the day of volunteering. And the way that she genuinely spoke about the impact on her life and the impact on the community certainly inspired me and made me think, yeah, that looks amazing. She looks so happy and joyful. And so really in a matter of 2 minutes, you were able to get an insight into what it's like volunteering with the Save the Children op shop. So I thought we'd just turn back to your pairs, and I really just want you to now then say, what words describe how your work impacts you? And who would you recommend joins you as a volunteer? Let's do that for 2 minutes just to round off this little story that you've got going right now, okay? So 2 minutes on the clock, and we'll put the poll back on for the online people. Okay, excellent. Sorry to cut in. Has anybody been able to recruit anyone? All right, so let's just see what everybody was saying online. All right, because when you're storytelling, you want to really get those emotive words into the story. So those asking those questions about how do you feel and how has it benefited you and how has it supported you, those kind of questions will really help bring out the motivation and those emotive stories. So what I've been able to do with you, whether you knew it or not, was I was able to create a story with you in the last few minutes. You shared what excites you about volunteering, and now you've shared about how it impacts you and who else you think needs to come and volunteer. So if you're only able to go back and write that down and capture that for yourself, you've got your first story. and you're able to go out and share that with people. So thanks everybody and thanks everybody for online for participating in that. So I hope that you've started to realise how easy and quick and powerful it can be to create stories and start to share stories. Now, if you want to dive more into it, these are the best 2 resources that I've found on the internet, and I have looked everywhere for good resources about storytelling. One of them is from Capacity Canada. That's a great guide, brilliant, very easy to read. And there's another one called A Guide to Strategic and Sustainable Nonprofit Storytelling. Again, heaps of information. That's a US guide, but lots of it is very, very relevant for you. So I just want to know, are you feeling empowered? Because, you need to feel empowered to go out and tell the stories. Now, what I'd like you to do is go to if you're on LinkedIn, right, you have to know your audience and where you hang out, right? So if you're looking for young people, don't really go to LinkedIn, okay? If you're finding young people, you got to go to upload it to TikTok, all right? But if you're with like-minded, my age kind of people and professionals, then you go to LinkedIn. So I decided that at Yallery this week, I would try and role model what I'm talking to you about. And we have a volunteer called Trish who comes into the office once a week. And I just said, Trish, I'm doing this presentation on storytelling and I'm just going to record you. Is that okay? And I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. And she let me do that. And so today I uploaded it on LinkedIn for you all to go and hear Trish's little story. It's like 30 seconds. And I just posted it out there. And I just thought I'd do that to kind of show you how quick and easy it is to start sharing. Now, I need lots of likes just to prove that it really does work, okay? So I want you to go onto LinkedIn and like my post about Trish and give us some thumbs up, okay, Trish, because she did that for me. All right, so my last question to you, and I'm going to put it up on the Slido just so that you can all go to Slido and just do this last question, is so as a result of this, knowing the power of storytelling, how quick and easy it is to get stories, you just got to find your storytellers and then how to upload and know where to upload these stories. So again, I haven't just been talking about film. This can be written stories as well. There's many ways of capturing and sharing stories. But I really just want to know from you then, why and how are you going to collect and share stories? How do you think it's going to impact your team and your organisation if you get better at storytelling? And not get better, just do it. You will get better. And there's lots of ways to start involving film and getting young people who are at university and want to make films and they just want opportunities to come and volunteer. Or it might be schools. They have film clubs. So my daughter has a film club at her high school, and they, again, were looking for opportunities to make films about volunteers so that they could learn about filmmaking. So that is one way you can get young people involved in your organisation. But the panel this morning spoke about that they kind of know how to do this really well if you're old like me and not so with some of it. So great, all right. Well, are there any questions? Oh, and don't forget to go to your handout in your red bag that I've got with those 4 steps on. So please feel free to use that. I think we're done. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Oh, just keep that up for one more second, please, while we move over, because I was enjoying reading those. Sorry. Thank you.
That was fantastic, Ruth. Thank you so much. And on one of the slides, it did say radio as a way of disseminating stories. Andrew, you would agree, I'm sure, that there is space on the radio for stories about volunteers? Always. So if you looping right back to the beginning of the day, when I talked about how local radio, local media is important in showing people how to be good citizens, and part of that is showing people how to be volunteers, wherever you're from or watching around Queensland, if you've got local media, a local community radio station or a local ABC, go and see them. 24 hours is a lot of time that every radio station has to fill every day, I can tell you. And so if someone came to me and said, here's an idea, why don't you do a segment every week at 9:45 on a Saturday and you have a volunteer from a different organisation every week, I would say, yes, that sounds great to me. If anyone wants to do that, I'm serious. And 9:45 Saturday, yes. Didn't just make that up. Okay, so having heard from Dr. Ruth Knight, and thank you for all of your responses, and there'll be plenty more Slido opportunities tomorrow, I get to introduce now a great example of storytelling in action. I'm going to show you a video from member organisation Upbeat Arts telling the story of their Absolutely Everybody choirs.
My name is Melissa Gill. I'm the program leader for the Absolutely Everybody Choir and the choir program for Upbeat Arts. So we run a choir program that is the same as any community choir program you would find anywhere, even though our target audience or our target group are people that live with significant mental health concerns and conditions. We run a community choir. So as part of that program, we teach vocal skills, we teach musical skills, we teach harmony, we stretch them in learning new things and in performance. It's a performance choir, so we do around about 15 performances in a year, and always growing, so always getting more performance opportunities for the group. There are lots of life skills that are taught as being a part of a choir. We learn to rely on one another, we learn to function as a member of the team, we learn to be responsible and to be reliable. We learn musical skills and vocal skills, obviously. For people that live with significant mental health issues, getting up and getting out of bed and getting out of the house on a daily basis is just really challenging. So this gives them a reason to do that, and they are incredibly, all of the people that we work with are incredibly dedicated to getting up and getting out of the house and having somewhere to go every day. When we go into performance, we ask our members to share their stories with whoever our audience is, and Nerida will tell you that before choir, and she's been a member of the choir since the beginning, she would be hospitalised for up to 11 months of every year, and since she joined the choir, she hasn't been hospitalised once. We see on a daily basis them reaching out, the members of our choir reaching out to one another and supporting one another. We see them grow in confidence, and that's one of the things we try to achieve is put them in a growth mindset and a space where they feel like they can take risks and that they will be supported in doing that, and that they can stretch and grow and try something new, and we support them through the process of doing that no matter what the outcome is. So hopefully what we're doing is we're giving them an opportunity to be brave, and then what we see is that bravery they take into their lives, and they start to be brave with their own lives outside of choir.
So my name's Kate. I'm a health buddy. My other job is an occupational therapist working in mental health, so that's what drew me to the chorus. What I love about this program is just seeing people blossom, and particularly seeing outcomes that in a clinical setting we have to work so hard to achieve. So things like building self-esteem, building social confidence, things that we have to work so hard on in a clinical setting. In a situation like the choir, those benefits just flow, those things just happen really naturally and organically. So it's very exciting as an occupational therapist, just watching how profoundly therapeutic it is to see people get together and just make amazing music together.
It's really inspiring to watch people be brave and do things they never thought they could, and it's really an honour to be able to support people to take chances and do things they never thought that they could do. And we know from the research, and we know from the feedback, and we know from our members that this choir is not only life improving, which is the goal, it is life changing, which is also the goal, but it's also life saving. We have a number of people in the group that will tell you that they wouldn't be here without the choir. that you can't help but be inspired by that.
Wow, what a day. And Ruth, I think the power of storytelling never more evident in so many of the stories that we've seen today. And I think that is what's so incredible about the volunteer sector is there are thousands of these stories everywhere, every day, and we hear them as volunteer managers, as people in volunteer involving organisations, we hear these stories and we see people's lives being changed. And we see volunteers that fulfilling that notion that helping others helps ourselves. And that's the greatest gift of volunteering, is that it's a two-way process. And I want to talk about the other greatest gift of volunteering, which is volunteering managers. And I think today some beautiful themes throughout all the speakers, even as we went from young people through to our projects and to academia and to the standards. It was lovely to see the standards and the academic things about leadership. Actually, I was going, some of those things line up there. So it's some beautiful synergies around that, and I think everybody's moving in that really amazing direction. I just want to recognise volunteer managers, because volunteers, oh, it's amazing, it just happens, it's magical, it's free, it's all of these things. There are some people doing some really bloody hard yards behind making the magic happen. And I think today we saw the complexity of that you have to think about your leadership style, that you have to think about reward and recognition, that you have to consider what's going to attract people, and you've got to write the right ad, and then you've got to remember to say thank you and work out what drives them to come back the next day, and then work out what happens if they don't come back the next day. And then you've got to convince management to invest in the volunteering program, because management thinks volunteering's free and it's just that thing that happens. But it's not. It's a skill and it's an art. And as volunteer managers, we talk about investing in the professional development of volunteers, but your professional development and helping you to learn skills to manage those volunteers, to manage both your volunteers and to manage up to your boards and your bosses in the organisations. They're really important skill sets. And I can't recommend enough to you our professional development program and the webinars and all of the material that we have available on the website, because we genuinely want to support and help you, because we understand just how hard your job is. And I want to take that space to say thank you, because we spend a lot of time thanking volunteers, but I want to thank you, because what you do is make that magic go round. Across our state, across our communities, you make the volunteer experience, you make the volunteers happen, you make the connections that give vulnerable people in the community the help that they need. So it's a huge big thank you to you. And what we've tried to do today and tomorrow is to inspire you, to empower you, and to ignite in you a renewed excitement about the job that you do, and a renewed respect for the huge professional load that you carry, and all of the different things that you need to consider in your job. And hope that over these 2 days we've given you some pieces of the puzzle to help make it easier for you, to help make you a better volunteer manager, to help make you better able to convince your organisation about the value of volunteer management and the value of a structured volunteering program. So all of these tools that we would like to be hoping that you'll take away from these 2 days, that will ignite you to be the absolute superpower volunteer managers that you are. And I hark back to I think Nathan's message this morning of, you probably didn't know you had superpowers until you became a volunteer manager. And, when you all walk out here with your underpants on the outside, I want you to remember that you have a superpower and that you really are super, super people. We talked about today about listening to the voices of volunteers, and I think also we need to listen to the voices of volunteer managers. But absolutely, it is about walking alongside people, our volunteers and our volunteer managers across the sector, and listening and hearing what people have to say to tailor programs and processes and frameworks that speak to and are born of the experience and the needs and desires of both our volunteers and our volunteer managers. So thank you all today for being here and for doing what you do. I do want to recognise also, today we've had some wonderful sponsors of the conference. So we have our gold sponsor, Rostify, who you heard from earlier. It's on the back of your name badge, which is where I'm having to cheat sheet read it off. Our silver sponsor, Qualk, and Q-Walk, sorry. Yay to Q-Walk. And our bronze sponsors, Volaby, Aon, and Analog Digital. So again, part of bringing, firstly, it's really fantastic to have sponsors who help us to bring some of these incredible speakers for you. But also, what we hope we're doing is to helping to expose you to new ideas and organisations and products that you don't already know about that might actually be able to help you in the job that you do every day. So a huge big thank you to our sponsors. Tomorrow we have, if you can be here around about 8:30 for an 8:45 start, where I know we had a bit of wet weather today, and look, we always joke that Brisbane, beautiful one day, complete chaos if it rains the next. We don't cope well with clouds in the sky. So we are trying to get started and run through fairly quickly tomorrow so we can get you out of there at the end of the day. So a lovely start there tomorrow. And I think that's all my messages. So we're going to go in now to the networking event, and we've got a little special entertainment in there for you. So if you take all of your things with you, we'll head into the networking event, and thank you.